Green 19. Green 19. We are back. Welcome back, Packers fans. It is Pulse of the Pack. I have weaseled my way. Yellow Weasel. I have weaseled my way into the intro of this show for one of what is very few times by virtue of the fact that I'm wearing this very old, disgusting helmet that I honestly don't know who it belonged to prior. This is an old prop from an old show. So I will turn it back over to our regular host. But before I do, introducing the Pulse of the Pack cast, I am Jason Perrone of Cheesehead TV, along with my co-host Paul Brettel, also of Cheesehead TV and Dairyland Express, and your host, Key of Packer Report, Jacob Westendorf. Jake, the floor is yours once again.
Yeah, it's good to be here, and I'm telling you, you can tell that it's been a while since the Packers have played a game of this magnitude. We're all feeling pretty damn good if we're letting Jason wear. The way I explained it was that 70s show, for those of you guys that watched that, they called it the stupid helmet. And honestly, I thought with him wearing it, it looked like Billy Bob Thornton's character from Bad Santa, just with a football helmet instead of a Santa beard. So,
Of course, it's a guy who's got gray hair.
yeah, that could be it. So here we are. It is the day of the NFC Championship game, and your Green Bay Packers, our Green Bay Packers, are playing for the NFC's crown against the San Francisco 49ers, and we are here to break it all down. Guys, Seahawks week is over. It's done. That was nice. But it's back to business, and back to business, they're going to get a little reinforcement here. Raven Green is back, and they activated him. He was designated to return off injured reserve, and they were able to activate him on Saturday night before going into the game. So the Packers, they're all systems go. Every single preferred starter is healthy, save for Danny Vitale. Remains to be seen how he'll go tomorrow. And I would imagine at this point, J.K. Scott is listed as questionable, but they kind of had that extra leeway with that roster spot. I would imagine at this point they expect him to play. Hopefully they're not using him a whole hell of a lot. But Paul, let's start here. Is there any impact you can expect from Raven Green? I would imagine him playing on defense is going to be a rarity.
Yeah, I think his snaps are going to be limited. We'll see him a lot more on special teams, but I do expect him to see time on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're activating him for a reason. They have Ibrahim Campbell, who's filled in his spot during his absence when he returned. But I think he's going to see some time, and he brings that physicality a lot like Campbell does, and I think they're going to rotate a little bit. But overall, it's just good to have him back.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, he is their best linebacker next to Blake Martinez, so that part certainly matters. I think if nothing else, he can give you a boost on special teams, and in a game of inches, that might be something that really matters here. Jason, on special teams, what are you looking at for Green's return? I mean, he was kind of a core special teamer before exiting against Minnesota with that ankle injury.
So before he got hurt, Raven Green, one of those guys that just brings the funk, as I say, to the defense. So if they're not going to get a lot of snaps in defense, they're going to get a little bit more of that heart and soul back. I mean, for an undrafted guy, for him to come in and be who he was a big loss for somebody of his draft stature. So on special teams, yeah, I mean, I think if nothing else, it's going to bring a little bit more nasty in a game where, like you said, the Packers are going to have to play a near perfect game if they want to win this thing. And so having all their preferred guys back is important. And you've seen starters move over to the special teams units over the past, we saw it last week. And so to have another one back just in time for this week, I think he's the kind of guy who can step in there, and because he mentally preps and he's been practicing for weeks, it can only be positive.
So let's talk about this a little bit. The Packers are playing for the NFC title. This will be the fourth time that Aaron Rodgers will start in an NFC Championship game. In our lifetimes, this will be, Favre played in 4 of those as well. So this will be the 8th time that we've seen that in our lifetimes. With Aaron Rodgers, the Packers are 1-2 in those games. They beat the Chicago Bears in 2010, his first appearance in the NFC title game. And then they had, obviously, the game in Seattle and the game in Atlanta, which was never particularly close. This game is interesting because in all those games I just mentioned, well, maybe not so much 2010, but Aaron Rodgers was at the peak of his powers and had to put on Superman's cape in order for the Packers to win. That hasn't been the case this year. Aaron Rodgers played well against the Seattle Seahawks, but he did not put on Superman's cape. It wasn't 350 yards, 4 touchdowns. Yes, he made some big plays when they needed him. He made some really good throws. I thought he played very well. That being said, it was not vintage MVP, light you up all over the field, slice and dice Aaron Rodgers. Going into this game, my question to you guys, and Jason, I'll start with you. Does Aaron Rodgers have to put on Superman's cape to win, or can they still win with him playing? Because here's another reality, and it's a storyline. How much it means, I guess, is up to you. Aaron Rodgers has never played well in an NFC Championship game. They fell behind a bunch. He got a lot of his stats against Atlanta after that game was well in question, well over. The Chicago game, he played well to start, and then through one really bad interception and one that was unfortunate, but still a better throw, and that pass doesn't get picked off. And then the Seattle game, I know a lot looks, there's a lot of people that point to all the other stuff, but one of the reasons, it's not a big reason, but one of the reasons they lost that game is because Aaron Rodgers did not play well. And the question now is, we all agree, I think, that he has to play well for them to win, but can he play a game like he did against Seattle last week and have Green Bay win, or does he have to be Rodgers in Atlanta or a level somewhat close to that from 2011? Jason?
Somewhere in the middle, not in the middle, somewhere closer to the Atlanta version, but not quite to that. I mean, he's never going to do that again. That was a once in a lifetime type of performance. And if he does, then, go place your bets or, play the lotto, because it's just not very likely, especially at this point in his career, because Rodgers made a lot of plays in Atlanta in that game with his mobility and his feet. And he can still do that, just not to the same degree. So I maintain the biggest thing, the headline for me in this game is the Packers are going to have to play their best game. They're going to have to play the best game on all phases, and they're going to have to be damn near perfect. I'm not going to say they have to be perfect, just to give themselves a chance to win. And that includes Aaron Rodgers playing above his averages. So he's going to have to play above average for sure. But, he takes care of the football as it is. San Francisco has a great defense. They get after the football. The pressure is going to create some things. And once they get, hopefully the Packers don't have a lead and they don't get to the point where they have to chuck it a bunch of times and take chances just to give themselves a shot to win, because that's when mistakes happen and when the turnovers happen. But I thought, even though he wasn't as stellar last week against Seattle, I think that performance would probably, especially one in which there was one dropped interception, and I don't think San Francisco is going to drop any. If Aaron Rodgers throws it one to them, then they're going to catch it. But I think a performance like last week, it's asking a lot of the defense, but the defense has a little bit easier job than does the offense, because I think San Francisco's defense is better than their offense. So it's a tough matchup, but he's still Aaron Rodgers for a reason.
Paul, do you give any credence to the fact that, and it's really strange because he's played well in wild card games, he's played well in divisional round games, but quite literally has never played well in an NFC Championship game. Do you give any credence to that theory? Does it matter at all once the ball is kicked tomorrow that hasn't happened?
For me, not at all. The past is the past. It's a different team, and what's asked of Aaron Rodgers this year is different than what's been asked of him in the past. But going back to your previous question, he needs to play very, very well tomorrow for the Packers to be able to pull out the win. The Niners have the best pass defense in terms of fewest passing yards allowed per game with 169. They're second by DVOA. We all seen what their pass rush does, and a big part of this game for the Packers is going to be establishing the run. They need, even if they struggle, San Francisco needs to respect it and know that it could be an option. Last week we saw Aaron Jones get 21 carries, even though he averaged only 3 yards per carry. Packers are going to need to do or be along those lines to open up things for Rodgers, because the secondary and the pass rush, if the Niners know that the passing game's coming, it's hard to envision a path for the Packers offense to have success that way.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I've mentioned this before. The Bosa family exists to give me nightmares. It just so happens that one of the Bosas now is standing between my favorite team and playing in the Super Bowl, and I tend to agree with you guys that he doesn't have to be Rodgers in Atlanta in 2011, because as Jason said, and I've said this before, that might be the best game I've ever seen a quarterback play with my own two eyes. It was incredible. And for asking him to replicate that, that's a tall order, especially against this defense, which, as Paul mentioned, number one in the NFL. I think that tells you everything you need to know about how stellar this defense is. They have a really good front four: Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Solomon Thomas, D Ford on the other side. Richard Sherman is still great. I mean, they still have a lot of really good players on that side of the ball. So that's expecting Aaron Rodgers to play, 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's just not feasible unless the 49ers just completely collapse, which they haven't really done all season long. Now, that being said, there are some paths to victory, and we'll talk about some of those as this show progresses. But I agree. I think he has to play well. I don't think that it's fair to ask him to play at that all-pro MVP kind of level. But can you play well enough to win this game? Because if you win this game, then you have a 50-50. You're one game away from being a champion again. And I know that Aaron Rodgers is hungry. I know this team is hungry. It's something they've talked about, is just that drive, that determination, that will to get to a Super Bowl and potentially win another one. For some guys, it would be the first time around. A lot of these guys, actually, it would be the first time around. There aren't a lot of guys on this team right now that were with the Packers in 2010. Off the top of my head, I could think Rodgers, Crosby, and Brian Bulaga, and Tramon Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. So with that in mind, that means there's 49 other guys on this roster, and a vast majority of them, if not all of them, have not tasted championship glory. So a total team effort, I think they'll be ready. And that brings me back to the Week 12 matchup. I think all of us can agree, 37-8, not competitive. The Packers fumble on the first series of the game. The Niners' first play was first and goal from the 2. They score on their second play from scrimmage, and it's 7-0 right away. And basically any life into that game was sucked out of the Packers right away. I think that we can all agree that they'll be better prepared this time around. I think this game is going to be much more competitive. That said, when you lose by 30, I mean, a 24-point game is much more competitive in that case. But I do think this is a game that you're looking at that goes down to the wire. So I think we can move on from the idea that Week 12 matters at all, because I really don't think it does. It's a couple different games, and I think the biggest difference in this game is that Alex Light's not going to play, and Alex Light was absolutely abused by Nick Bosa in Week 12. And now Brian Bulaga seems recovered from his illness, ready to roll. If he can't go or gets dinged, then Jared Veld here has been a godsend to this team. Now, Jason, you had a point that you wanted to make. You're the one who seems to think that these things matter more than most normal people do, but go on.
Yes, thank you very much. So before we move off of the first meeting between these two teams, we actually have a fourth member of the show today. We have a very special guest, gentlemen. This is unannounced, and this is a special thing that was unforeseen, but I heard these words somehow in my inner ear during that first game, after that first possession, and the rest of the game ensued, and it sounded something like, "What the hell's going on out there?"
What the hell?
It is Vince Lombardi, who is with us here on the show and in spirit. And in fact, since we've gone off the rails, why don't we continue to go off the rails? We've got this guy right here who has led the Packers to victory over the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game. So Brett is here, Brett and Vince. And then lastly, so Raven Green, sporting the number is 24 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Willie Wood. Number 24, Willie Wood is with us. So maybe Raven Green comes up with some kind of a big play, causes a fumble on special teams, or maybe even better on defense. So those three guys, they're kind of looking at me right now. But I just wanted to let everybody else know that we had all of that firepower with us. And now we're the best Packer podcast ever, because no other show has ever had those three on it.
I can personally promise that is a fact, no matter what anybody might tell you. So there we go. There's that. We can move off of the first matchup, like we said. I mentioned, and it's something that was frustrating in terms of the national media, because I don't think it was discussed that Brian Balaga played 9 snaps, and then after that, Alex Light just got abused. So that'll make it different from this standpoint. But looking at when Green Bay has, so the way we're going to break this down is when Green Bay has the ball, what are their keys? And then when San Francisco has the ball, what are the keys for Green Bay there? So let's start with when Green Bay has the ball. And to me, this game starts up front. I think a lot of games start up front. The reason I was so confident in the Packers beating Seattle last week was because I thought they could dominate and control the line of scrimmage. That's a tough ask this week, to dominate the line of scrimmage, because Green Bay does have a good offensive line, but you are facing 4 first-round picks up front. Quan Alexander is back, and he's a good player. Fred Warner was supernova against the Packers the first time these two teams played. But I think the biggest key here is to make it so the line of scrimmage against San Francisco the first time these two teams played was completely in the 49ers' favor. It was Rodgers dropped back 41 times. It felt like he was under pressure on 40 of them. I'm sure that's not the case, but I mean, those are the numbers that kind of stick out in my head from that standpoint. The key is, can you get it to where, can Rodgers stand in the pocket and hold the ball and dance around and pat it and then wait 6 seconds to throw it? No. This 49er front is very good, and they're going to make some plays. There's going to come a time where Rodgers is under pressure, has to get rid of the ball before he wants to, get sacked, whatever. That being said, the key to this game is slowing down, in my opinion, those interior guys, because as much talk as there is, and it's deserved on Bosa and Ford, both of those guys are really good pass rushers. Those interior guys, they can wreck that game too. And Eric Armstead was awesome against the Packers the first time. Completely ruined a lot of what Green Bay was trying to do. So Billy Turner, Elton Jenkins, Corey Linsley, you guys better be ready. Buckle up your chin straps, because if Green Bay is going to go to the Super Bowl, it may very largely be on your shoulders to make sure that the quarterback can get some plays off in the passing game and that you can open at least a semblance of a couple holes in the running game. Paul, what are your thoughts on the Packers' ability here potentially to win the line of scrimmage? Because as I mentioned the last time, they did not even. I think if you make it a stalemate, it's a win for Green Bay. Or if you only lose it by, the littlest of margins, but you can't lose it the way you did the first time around.
No, not at all. And when I think back and when I went back and watched back that Week 12 matchup, all I could think about was how bad, and on both sides of the ball, Green Bay got whooped in the trenches. Part of that was with Alex Light being out, but like you said, they're going to have to attack the middle part of that defensive front of the Niners. The Niners have given up over 112 rushing yards per game this season, with I think about 6 or 7 or so over 120. So that's going to be the Packers' path, and that's not meant to make it sound like that's going to be easy by any means, because it's all relative. And it's still a very difficult task, but that's what they're going to have to attack, because if it turns into what it did last time, where the Packers are down 7, 10, 13, 14 points, and that Niners defensive front gets to pin their ears back. As good as the Packers offensive line has been, I don't know that Rodgers is going to have enough time, especially with that secondary, even with Devontae Adams. So they're going to have to establish the run, make the Niners respect it. And again, I know I keep going back to that, but I think that's such a huge key.
Yeah, and then you get into the fact that crowd will have. The Packers are going to go silent count, most likely, are going to have to go silent count. Rodgers talked about that, having to take the crowd out of the game, because that's just how it is. It makes things a lot more difficult. And when you have a vicious pass rush like that, you've seen it. Green Bay has a good pass rush like that. When the crowd is loud, those guys can pin their ears back and go. And last week against Minnesota, when that game was competitive, it wasn't as bad for Kirk Cousins. Once the 49ers established a bit of a bigger lead, and those guys could just pin their ears back and come after Kirk, he didn't stand a chance. Jason, one of the other keys on defense here is Richard Sherman. And we all know the elephant in the room. The talk is that Rodgers basically ignores that side of the field when they play against Richard Sherman, and there is some credence to that. The opener against Seattle in 2014, they didn't throw over there. They only threw over there the one time against Richard Sherman in the championship game. Should have been a free play. Michael Bennett was offsides, but instead it turned into a Richard Sherman interception. Can the Packers, I know they said they're going to move Devontae Adams around, and that's great. I think that's what they should do. But can the Packers find a path to victory Can they win if they basically ignore the fact they're like, okay, Sherman's over here. That side of the field is null and void. It's gone and done. Can they win that way?
No, they can't. They didn't win that way the first week one of 2014, and it's never a plan to just avoid a player in his entirety. And frankly, that's embarrassing if that's really the actual plan. I think that's a bit of ruse going on by Rodgers, LaFleur, and those guys, because it's 5 years later. You know, you're really that worried about a Richard Sherman 5 years later? He's been playing well this season, but if it's Davante Adams against Richard Sherman, I mean, I would have taken that bet 5 years ago, 4 years ago for sure, because I sat in the stands in 2016 and watched Davante Adams make Richard Sherman look foolish. And for those of you who don't remember, go back and Google or go onto Twitter and look for the end around touchdown by Jeff Janis late in the game. Richard Sherman can't even stand up on his own 2 feet, and Davante Adams is just crushing him all over the place. So that's not a plan. You can't avoid a single guy, and I don't think Richard Sherman is the guy that you need to avoid necessarily. I think there's other guys that are way more dangerous. You mentioned Fred Warner, and that took me back to that. You know, there's a lot of parallels to past games here. So Fred Warner kind of takes me back to the days when Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman were roaming in the middle. And in 2012 and 2013, one of the reasons why the Packers struggled against the Niners was because of those linebackers. And so Warner is absolutely a guy that I think is going to have something to say about tomorrow, way more so than Richard Sherman. And then another guy that for some reason, and this won't be any surprise to you, Jake, Paul, I'll introduce this to you. It's called the Jason has a gut feeling for no reason at all. And it's Jaquiski Tartt. Yeah, it is pretty much. Yeah, we could make an acronym out of it when I have more time to come up with something clever for what the letters stand for. But Jaquiski Tartt, for some reason, I just feel like he's going to punch a ball out or something, and he's more likely than Richard Sherman. So no, you can't do that. And the other reason why is it's one thing if Richard Sherman were going to shadow a receiver, Alan Lazard, Devontae, he's not. Nope. He's not going to shadow. So to say that the entire right side of the field is gone, it's only going to take San Francisco 2 or 3 possessions to realize that's the game plan. And then guess what? It's bad news the rest of the game. You just literally shrunk the field by a fourth. And do you really want to do that? So obviously not a good plan, not in a game of this magnitude at all.
Right. And I don't think that we're saying that you have to throw the ball towards Sherman 10 times. I think that would be stupid also. I mean, Richard Sherman's a generational cornerback. He's one of the best players of his era. He's a no doubt first ballot Hall of Famer. And I hate him. And I hate him because he's good. Let's get that out of the way. Like, that's the reason why. He's one of those guys, like, when he's on a good defense, he'll let you know that he's the best player. And he's one of those guys, if he wore green and yellow, I would think he was awesome, but he doesn't, so I hate him. So I think that I'm not saying they got to throw the ball over at him 100 times, but you can't just ignore that side of the field altogether because, like you said, we've seen it. I remember the season opener, it was just Jarrett Boykin was a sacrificial lamb. And they threw him over there and said, okay, you're not going to get any targets. We're going to have Jordy and Cobb on the other side and go to work from there. This Packers offense doesn't have that kind of talent to be able to do that. So they're going to have to figure out a way to win on all 4 quadrants of the field, like you said there, Jason. So that's when Green Bay has the ball. Paul, I agree with you. I think that their path to victory here is establishing or at least making that running game respectable and getting Aaron Jones involved. I think he's a big key to tomorrow. Tyler Ervin, Jamal Williams, those guys too, because they're going to have some opportunities because you have to be able to protect Aaron Rodgers. And one of the ways to do that and slow that pass rush down is running the ball. And Green Bay didn't really have an opportunity to even try to get that going in the first game because it was as quick as it was that it was 7-0. And then Green Bay's playing from behind the rest of the night. The biggest thing I think for Green Bay on offense tomorrow is that I think there are times this year where you can see it too. The offense, they can't sustain drives of going, or like have multiple 3-and-outs in a row. And they've had that issue at times this season where they've gone, you look up and they go 3-and-out 4 straight times. I'm not saying they got to score on every drive because I really do think Green Bay's path to victory in this game is a low 20s, high teens kind of game. But you can't tire your defense out by continuing to throw them back out there after a minute and a half of sitting on the bench because you're going 3 and out. Even if you get 2 first downs, stall out, punt. 1 first down, stall out, punt. That's fine. But we can't have that successive 3 and outs. So that's something I think you got to watch there as well. Let's move to defense. Green Bay's got a really good one. It's not as good as the 49ers defense. I think that's fair to say, but the Preston Smith, Zadarius Smith, those guys have been great. There's a path to victory for them on defense as well, and I really think it's on the right side of the offensive line. The first time these two teams played, San Francisco did not run the ball. That was kind of the big concern, was that San Francisco would be able to ram the ball down the Packers' throat, and really that wasn't the case. The 49ers, they were efficient on offense. They had, obviously, Tevin Coleman scored a touchdown. Jimmy G threw a couple of touchdowns. I thought, actually, looking back at that game this week, Paul, that Green Bay played pretty well on defense before the dam broke, basically. They had that big backbreaker. There were 2 big backbreaker plays on offense, one to Deebo Samuel and one to George Kittle. It just so happens those guys are matchup problems, and they're the perfect type of matchup problem for Green Bay. That being said, I do think there are ways to try and slow those guys down. I would shadow Deebo Samuel and Jair Alexander, because I think Emmanuel Sanders is a good player, but he's not the big play threat that Deebo is. Emmanuel Sanders is a reliable player. He can make some plays down the field, but I think that's a little bit better of a matchup for Kevin King. George Kittle, having looked back, he's going to make some plays. He's the best tight end in the NFL. There's either him or Travis Kelce. Take your pick. And if Green Bay is going to win the Super Bowl, they're probably going to have to face both of those guys. That being said, I think being physical with him is the way to go. How you do that, Adrian Amos, Ibrahim Campbell, maybe Raven Green. The one thing you got to figure out a way to not do is get him isolated in coverage on Blake Martinez. And Kyle Shanahan's as smart as they go. I'm sure he's thought of that. If I've thought of it, I'm quite certain, actually, that he has thought of it. That being said, Jason, I really do think the biggest key to this game, shut down that running game, and let's see if Jimmy Garoppolo can beat you. And let's see if you can get a pass rush on him. And last week he threw 2 gifts to Eric Kendricks. Kendricks caught one of them. That's the other thing. When he throws you the ball, you have to catch it. So, Jason, what are your thoughts on Green Bay? This time they'll have Staley, they'll have McGlinchey, they have their whole offensive line. Everybody's healthy, everybody's full go for this game, except maybe Danny Vitale and J.K. Scott. Those guys are good to go. What are your thoughts on the Smiths' ability to beat those guys and get pressure?
Well, if you've been watching Instagram and following Zadarius and Preston Smith this week, I don't care who the offensive linemen are in front of them. Best wishes to those offensive linemen, because the Smith brothers are coming ready to play, and you're going to have to put them down if you want to take them out of this game. So I think they're going to be a factor, even if they're creating pressure and moving things around and getting Jimmy G off of his spot. They will be a factor regardless of whatever San Francisco's offensive line can do. They've proven it, and they deserve that respect from us to say, I expect them to do that. I hope San Francisco doesn't feel the same way. I hope San Fran honestly is drinking all the Kool-Aid that the media has been throwing their way this week, is my biggest wish. But I do think that as rough of a matchup as Green Bay's offense against San Francisco's defense is, offensively, San Fran is not that formidable, but they're still a really tough matchup, and it's because of those guys. Deebo Samuel, as a rookie, I mean, I'm scared to think of what he's going to be like 3 or 4 years from now. And George Kittle is George Kittle. George Kittle over the middle is the cliche phrase everybody says. The Packers have some good defenders this season that have done some really good things. Chandon Sullivan, Ibrahim Campbell, Raven Green probably won't play much on defense. Blake Martinez in the middle. San Francisco is going to find a matchup, and they're going to find a matchup that's a problem. And one of the reasons why is because they've got those weapons. And Emmanuel Sanders as your 3rd or 4th option is a really good place to be. And I haven't even talked about the run game. This is all just assuming that the Niners are throwing. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the second half last week against Minnesota, Jimmy Garoppolo didn't even throw the ball 10 times. So if the Packers don't stop the run, this entire portion of the show is moot. But I still think that your biggest problem or your biggest issue is going to be Kittle because, like you said, Jake, he's one of the best tight ends in the league, and he is a very tough tackle. He's tough to tackle with the most sound defender, let alone some of these guys that are a little bit smaller. Now, Kevin King isn't. Kevin King will get his nose dirty, and he'll get in there and he'll play. But George Kittle has shown, and he showed it against the New Orleans Saints in their win against the Saints in that shootout, that if he's got the ball in his hand, it's going to take a mountain to get him down before he reaches the end zone. So, to me, it's Kittle, but Deebo Samuel, I just really hope that the defense has got their keys and their cues figured out when they see which formation that they run the jet sweeps out of, because Samuel runs the sweep. He can get out in space and run. In addition to the run game, you run some misdirection. If they get the run game going, San Fran does, that misdirection, that sweep is going to be dangerous because there could be some openings there. It's a pick your poison day for the Packers defense. I don't think that they can't get it done. But again, like I said earlier, it's going to take both sides of the ball and in special teams, all three phases. It's going to take their best game of the season to win their most important game of the season. So that's basically what it's going to come down to. Pick or choose whichever one you want.
Paul, Jason talked about some of the misdirection and the things that Kyle Shanahan's offense can do. And we've kind of seen, the Packers offense is like Shanahan 101. Mm-hmm. And the 49ers offense is like Shanahan calculus. That's just the byproduct of having 3 years in that system. They have players in there that have either grown up in it or they've brought guys in that know that system. Tevin Coleman comes to mind, for example. One of the keys Mike Pettin talked about this week was keep your eyes disciplined and understand, that's stay within your keys, stay within your discipline. In the past, we've made a running joke about communication issues or communication breakdown. And we saw that the last time these two teams played. The George Kittle touchdown was a blown coverage. I know it was basically blamed on Kevin King, but Matt LaFleur said afterwards that wasn't really the case. Mike Pettin said the same thing as well. How confident are you that Green Bay can stay disciplined? And San Francisco is going to make their plays. What you can't do is give them one, because that team is way too good for you to be giving them opportunities. How confident are you Green Bay is going to be able to stay disciplined and do their thing on defense?
Like you said, San Francisco is going to have their moments. And for Packer fans, when we look at what we want the Matt LaFleur offense to look like, as once everyone knows it and it's implemented, for a number of years, it's Kyle Shanahan, San Francisco. But a big thing that the Niners did last time was giving up the big play, or the Packers did, was giving up the big play to the Niners. Niners had passing plays of 61 yards, 42 and 22 yards. And there was an article in the Green Bay Press Gazette just this week that said after that game, the defense and all defensive personnel meeting, they went in and watched the film of that game, and they realized that communication, go figure, was the biggest reason for those breakdowns. And since then, they've played 7 games, and I went back and looked. Over those 7 games, they've given up 10 plays of 20 yards or more and 2 plays of 40 yards or more. And this was a team that through the first 12 weeks of the season was near the top of the list in the NFL in terms of 20-yard plays and 40-yard plays given up. So they've gotten much better at that communication aspect, understanding what their responsibilities are. And so I am confident that they aren't going to hurt themselves in giving up the big plays. Although with that said, I think just given the personnel that the Niners have, Kyle Shanahan as the head coach and what he's going to draw up, it's to be expected that there might be a play or two where that is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to be the Packers hurting themselves like it was last time.
Ghosts of NFC Championship past. If you look back at the games that the Packers have won in the NFC title game, they've had somebody who's been a bit of an unsung hero. Somebody that maybe you didn't expect. It wasn't, Aaron Rodgers throwing a touchdown pass to Jordy Nelson or something like that. In 2010, it was B.J. Raji getting a pick six. Sam Shields had 2 interceptions. 2 guys that Packers fans probably knew were good players, but I don't even think you could have expected that from them. In 1997, they had a couple different guys make some plays. In 1996, it was Dorsey Levens making some big plays. Again, good, but the backup running back kind of behind Edgar Bennett there. Eugene Robinson had an interception in 97 in the Mud Bowl. Antonio Freeman had a big day. their pass rush as a whole really just dominated the 49ers. Can you guys tell I watched all those games this week? It was a nice way to get ready for this Sunday. So that being said, guys, give me real quick a minute or less basically on if you were to bet. Paul, we'll start with you since I see you right now. Who is the guy that you think you could say at the end of the day, like, man, that guy really did make a play that just changed the tide, or make several plays, or it could be a big game, like it could be just an unsung guy having a big game, kind of like Sam Shields having 2 picks. Who is that guy for you?
For me, I guess he's a big name. It's Jimmy Graham. But given his play as a Green Bay Packer, what I'm expecting of him and what I hope he can do, it hasn't been what he's done in his tenure as a Packer. Last week, he had 3 receptions, 49 yards. All 3 receptions came on third downs. All 3 went for first downs, including that game-clinching reception. This week, they're going to need him again. Devontae Adams is going to be targeted like he always is. Hopefully, Allen Lazard's good to go. That's another aspect that the Packers didn't have last time, a reliable number 2 option. But Jimmy Graham's going to be a big factor as well. The Niners play a ton of cover 3. So the middle of the field on those curls, deep crossers out in the flats are going to be some of the open spaces in that. And that's just spells where Jimmy Graham can make an impact. So in order for the passing game to be successful, they're not going to be able to rely on Devontae the entire time like they have or did last week. They're going to need other guys to step up. He's one of those guys, and I expect and hope he has a big game. And by a big game, he's not going to go for 110 yards by any means, but I'm thinking of what he did last week. 50, 60 yards, has 4 or 5 receptions, but they come in big moments, third downs, extend drives, hopefully in the red zone for a touchdown. So he's someone that, like I said, he's not an under-the-radar player by any means, but given his performance as a Packer so far, I expect him to elevate that, and hopefully he can this week.
Yeah, and I think last week's game is a really good example of something like that I'm talking about. I don't think anybody would have expected Jimmy Graham to make 1, the biggest catch of the game, the third down that sealed the game, and 2 other really big third downs. Jason, who's your guy?
So I'll go to the other side of the ball, and I'll say that it's a starter, but it's one that I haven't seen make the big splash play yet, and I've been calling for it all season long, and that's Darnell Savage, the safety. I think Savage should be a big part of the game plan when you've got all the pass catchers that the Niners do. I think Savage needs to be a big part of it, and it's time for him to step up and make a big play and do something special, not at the cost of what I think, and Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think didn't we learn that it was Jair who kind of was the reason why Kittle got that long touchdown? I think Jair, it was his coverage or his responsibility, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't want to see – is that right?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen to what the coach said.
So I don't want to see Savage do something at the expense of giving up a big play and being too risky. But I do think Savage is due for a big play, and I think Jair's due for a big play too. And I'm talking about the type of splash where you had Jair earlier in the season take a ball away from Noah Fant, literally rip it out of his arms and for a fumble and recover the ball. Something of that magnitude there. If I had to pick one on offense, Paul, you mentioned Jimmy Graham. The interesting thing that I think is now there's no better time than to unleash a weapon that you've had but have not really been able to use much in your offense, and that would be Jay Sternberger. Does he, who finally caught his first ball last week, does he have a bigger role, and do they have some plays geared up for him that aren't on film that San Francisco isn't ready for? No better time for him to have somewhat of a breakout or make a couple of big catches than in the NFC Championship game. I mean, they have to get past this game to get to Miami, so you might as well pull out all the stops. So I think 87 could be one of those guys to look out for as far as unsung on the offense.
Yeah, and you could tell this week that Matt LaFleur is very excited about Jay Sternberger earning that role and getting more snaps in the offense. He actually had the highest percentage of snaps of the Packers tight end group last week. So he's somebody I'm really excited about in 2020, but I'm not worried about 2020 right now. I'm worried about 2019 and winning the Super Bowl. So with that being said, I've got 2 guys myself that could be one. One, it kind of our favorite whooping boy and then kind of became a running joke, and that was Kyler Fackrell. And I say that because I think there's going to be so much attention paid to the Smiths and Kenny Clark, and for good reason. Those guys are great players. The Packers had 5 sacks last week, 2 from Z, 2 from P, 1 from Kenny. There's your 5 sacks right there. It makes sense. Those are your best players. That being said, with Kyle Shanahan's ability to scheme some things up, I think Fackrell could get into some favorable matchups. And I really wanted to pick Rashawn Gary here, but there's just the reality with him right now just is that he's getting 10 to 15 snaps a game. And I think that you can see the flashes, but you can see Green Bay very clearly has a plan with him. And he's behind those three guys on the depth chart. So he's another one of those guys that maybe 2020 would be the year. And I would expect that you see his snaps increase in 2020 because I imagine Kyler Fackrell is going to be playing somewhere else next season. So here's your chance to have a signature game in Green Bay. Make yourself a lot of money. Think Eric Walden against the Chicago Bears in 2010. You know, those 3 sacks, huge game. That's something I could see from Fackrell. The other one, I watched it today, guys, the Mud Bowl against the San Francisco 49ers. And who was one of the best players on the field that day? Desmond Howard. Who plays Desmond Howard's position right now? Tyler Irvin. Packers special teams, when Green Bay played against San Francisco, was an absolute punchline. Not the case anymore. Irvin, it's amazing how one player can change so many different things. And I think Irvin has an opportunity. Special teams can turn the tide in games like these. We've seen it before. Not to bring up painful memories, but in 2007 against the New York Giants, I remember the Giants punt returner fumbling, and Jarrett Bush tried to pick it up and score a touchdown on the play instead of falling on the ball. If he falls on the ball, Green Bay's got to move the ball a little bit and get a field goal out of this situation, and they win the game that way. Instead, special teams had an opportunity to turn the tide, and they didn't. Green Bay didn't really have any plays on special teams in 2010. They had a bad one. They had a kickoff return for a touchdown against them in Atlanta, but that's really it. So I really do. I think that Irvin could be a big contributor tomorrow if Green Bay is able just to change the tide in a return game, get them some good field position. Everything like that's going to matter against this defense because it's really hard to go 85, 75 yards against this defense. You're going to need to be able to steal some of that hidden yardage in the return game. So those are my 2 guys. Gentlemen, it's pick time. Packers, Niners, 5:40, Santa Clara, Levi Stadium, I think is what they call it now. California against the 49ers. The first time these 2 teams have played in a game of this magnitude since 1998. They've met in the playoffs 3 times since then. The 49ers, more than that, actually. 4 times since then. Once at Lambeau Field. Twice at Lambeau Field, twice in San Francisco. The Packers are 1-3 in such games. Jerry Rice fumbled in one. Green Bay won in 2002, a wild card game or something like that. And then the Colin Kaepernick Bowls. And if I'm missing any, please feel free to let me know on that. But simple question, Jason. Who wins?
So I said earlier, I kind of tipped my pick a little bit earlier. If the 49ers and the Packers both, I'm watching both of your faces. Actually, I can't see Jake's. Paul's, I can see yours. Paul has been my co-host on Pack a Day this whole season, so he's gotten enough of a flavor that he kind of knows. He's looking down. So I said earlier, the Packers are going to have to play their best game of the season, darn near perfect, to give themselves a chance to win this, and that may not be the case. San Francisco may play sloppy, and let's hope that they do. But if both of these teams play their best game of the season, San Francisco's got the edge. They're at home, and they've got the better roster, and they've got the better team right now. You know, that could change moving forward. But if that's the case, then I can't pick the Packers to win because it just doesn't seem very realistic. So it's not going to be a blowout. I said earlier, we chatted earlier today, and you know, Jake, you asked me if I was going to predict a blowout, which is fair, because I've done that in the past when I wasn't feeling confident. If it's going to be a blowout, though, it's going to be in the Packers' favor. I don't see San Francisco blowing the doors off of Matt LaFleur because he got embarrassed last time, and I've tweeted several times since then. Any team can get beat, and any really good team can get beat badly on any given day. It's possible, but it can't happen twice, and so I don't think Matt LaFleur is going to let it happen twice. What I see this thing coming down to is I've got it a 1-point game. I'm feeling a 24-23 final. Unfortunately, it's not in favor of the Packers just simply because of how good they have to be. And I know they're capable of doing it, but it's a lightning in a bottle type of situation in my eyes. And so I think the Packers put up a very respectable performance, give us a lot to hope for going into next year. And, you know, I feel a lot better this time than I did even in 2016 and definitely over 2014. So this year has a little bit of a different air. I could see myself walking away with my head held up high, even if the Packers don't win. I don't pick them to win, but obviously If they do, then on the next show or the first show that we do after this, then I should have to do some sort of kangaroo court something. I maybe let you guys pick what that's going to be.
I'm all for it. Okay, guys, one more thing. Jason, 2 words or less. Who wins the AFC game?
Casey.
Okay, that's 0 words, I think, but that's less than 2. So good job, Paul. 2 words or less. Who wins the AFC game?
Patty Mahomes.
Patty Mahomes. I'm with that as well. So we all have Kansas City in the AFC. Okay, Paul. Who wins the more important game? Who wins the NFC Championship game?
So I just want to say first off, this game will be nothing like the last one.
Agreed.
The game, or with the fumble on the first possession, Niners picked up the ball within the 5-yard line, scored right away. Things snowballed from there, got out of control. That isn't happening again. And contrary to what the national media thinks about this Packers team, they are much improved from Week 12. Yep. Aaron Rodgers is coming off of what I would consider his best performance of the season. Devontae Adams is rolling right now and damn near unstoppable. Last 4 games, over 450 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, 35. He's caught 35 of his 53 targets. That's tough to beat. They've also added Tyler Ervin, as we mentioned. Allen Lazard has emerged as the number 2 receiver. Chandon Sullivan. Alex Light will not be starting at right tackle or playing significant snaps. Even if Bulaga goes down, we have Jared Valdir. Also, last time, the Niners, their running backs averaged almost 6 yards per carry. Since that game, running backs are averaging under 90 yards per game against this defense, thanks to the elevated play of Dean Lowry, Blake Martinez, Ibrahim Campbell, and, of course, Kenny Clark. Also, I already talked about big plays earlier. Packers are giving up far fewer of those. I say all that to say this. It's going to be a close game, but on the road, the Niners, they are a stout, very, very good team. I think it's going to be a difficult matchup and it's going to take a vintage Rodgers type of performance, not the best we've ever seen by any means, but a vintage Rodgers performance for the Packers to win. I'm going San Francisco 27, Green Bay 23.
I hear your points. I understand your points. I like your points.
Well, thank you.
San Francisco 49ers are very good. Kyle Shanahan is a very good head coach. We've seen him have slip-ups in moments like these before. Part of the reason Atlanta blew a 28-3 lead was because of him. Now, there were things that happened on the field, obviously, as well, but some of it was him. Something as simple as after Julio Jones goes into God mode, he needs to run the ball 3 straight times, kick a field goal, and the game is over. The 49ers defense is awesome. That's true. They're tough on the road. That's true. This game reminds me so much of the 2015 NFC Championship game, which, as we record, happened 5 years ago today. Packers were 7.5-point dogs in that. They're 7.5-point dogs going into tomorrow's game. They were 8.5-point dogs against that Seattle team, which I thought that number was huge when I read it. I looked it up. It was true. Okay. You said it yourself, Paul. Alex Light's not playing. Brian Bulaga is. That helps neutralize Joey Bosa. That helps open running lanes for Aaron Jones. That protects Aaron Rodgers. Matt LaFleur is 6 weeks better as a head coach than he is this time around. They will not let. They played their worst possible game that night. That's not going to happen this time around. So I say all that. I've heard the national media. I've heard the matchups. I hear all your points. I don't give a fuck about them. Packers 23, 49ers 21, and we will ride that D train all the way to Miami. Packers win. Close matchup. The underdog has won the last 2 games in the NFC Championship game. The Eagles were home dogs to the Vikings. Nobody thought that the Eagles were going to beat that Vikings defense. They did anyways. Nobody thought the Rams were going into the Superdome and beating the Saints. Yes, I know pass interference, whatever. They won anyways. 3rd time's a charm, man. Make it 3 in a row. Why not? An underdog. I think you go back to that game 5 years ago. I know it hurts. The Packers had the most ridiculous series of crap that had to happen for them to lose that game in Seattle. They should have won. This time they will because they're better coached, they're better prepared, and they're better from that. All gas, no brakes, all the way to Miami, baby. The Green Bay Packers are going to the Super Bowl. That's going to do it. Go ahead. I just have to say, after hearing your speech, you make me feel awful for picking against the Packers. Well,
Go Pack, go. Let's
yeah,
go.
I'm a coach first and foremost, so motivational speeches, I guess, are kind of my thing. Call it irrational confidence. I don't care. I mean, I've had this feeling all week, and you guys can vouch. You guys know me. You've known me long enough. This does not happen every single game. So it's not just me getting swept up in the romanticism of the NFC title game. I didn't think Green Bay was beating Atlanta, for example, a couple of years ago. I thought Green Bay was going to get trounced by Minnesota a month ago. So, I mean, it was a recent thought on that. I just think that this Packers team has the smell, the scent, the feeling, whatever you want to call it, of the team of destiny. And teams like that, special teams, win championships. And I think this Packers team is a special team. I think that's true regardless of what happens tomorrow, but I think they'll prove me right and be a special team on Sunday and roll in to play Kansas City. And I'll reserve my pick for if that matchup does actually come to fruition. Jason, you unmuted yourself, which means usually you want to say something. So go ahead.
No, I unmuted myself so I could join in the Go Pack Go at the end. But yeah, I do want to say all week leading up to the Seattle game, you were very confident. And at that point, we were still in our infancy as podcast partners, and we hadn't even started doing Pulse yet.
We weren't. Yeah, we weren't together when that happened because I remember doing that show with Ross and Ryan and it was the most depressing show ever.
Yeah, and I had, we guested together on a couple of shows, but that was it. But we were in communication, and you kept saying they're going to win, and it was that game that has attached me to and hanging on a lot of your predictions ever since then. So no pressure, because if they don't win tomorrow, the first person who's going to get the wrath of my disappointment is probably going to be you. So I apologize in advance, but I don't apologize, actually. I take that back. There won't be any apology necessary. And for my Office fans out there who love Andy Bernard, you'll know where that line comes from.
And I'm not one of those, so I don't know. I would like to point out, too, and I have text message proof. The last time I had a feeling like this was 2016, and the Packers were going into Dallas to play the Cowboys, the number 1 seed Dallas Cowboys. And I told my friend Vince, Packers 34, Cowboys 31, Mason Crosby at the buzzer to win the game. Go back and watch the highlights. I know you guys all know it. That's exactly how it played out. So, yeah, sometimes a blind squirrel finds a nut, but I think tomorrow's the day. I can feel it, whatever you want to call it. I think the Packers win. I think all year long, this has been everybody's found reasons why the Packers can't win, and that's great. They've spent another week doing that, and you can spend 2 more weeks doing it all the way up to the Super Bowl, and you can call them the worst NFC champion ever. And I hope you get the opportunity to call them the worst Super Bowl champion ever, because I won't care. I will not care. There will be a picture behind me. You guys can see Star and Rodgers and another frame of Rodgers over here and all that stuff. Something will be replaced. It'll be the D train or something from this year's team, because I just have a hunch. This is it. This is time. Let's go. I'm ready. I'm ready for the game to start. And we only have let's do some quick math here.
20 hours.
20. There you go. Paul's good for that. 20 hours until kickoff. It's supposed to be -1. My brother and I have joked that we're going streaking if Green Bay wins. I don't think that's going to happen at -1. But
no video, please.
No videos. I can promise you that much. Yeah, thank God. Nobody wants to see that. So
a lot more Niner fans out there now.
Yeah, I already apologized to work if I showed up still drunk on Monday. Obviously, I won't do that. But, I mean, I already apologized for that. So let's give me a good reason to feel that way. I'm ready. So let's roll. That's going to do it for this edition. Check out our YouTube channel, Pulse of the Pack. You can follow Paul at Paul_Brettel. You can follow Jason. He's at Jason Perone. You can follow me, the only one picking your Green Bay Packers to go to the Super Bowl. That's me. I am Jacob Westendorf, and you can find me at Jacob Westendorf on Twitter. NFC Championship Game, Packers-Niners, 5:40 Central Time kickoff. Thank you guys for listening. Of course, as always, 100% for an NFC Championship. Go, Pack, go.
Go.
Go, Pack, go.